Welcome back to another episode of the IBC Guys. I'm Dave. This is Mike. We got a good episode ahead of us today. So we're going to talk through some definitions that people often, sometimes talking IBC can be like listening to Chinese. I had someone tell me that actually the other day. So Dave, you're talking to me in Chinese. So the goal today is maybe to define some of those Chinese words. They're not Chinese words, but in the IBC world, there's some key words that need to be understood to begin to grasp where we're headed. And we're going to try and talk through some of those today. So that's going to be the podcast and hopefully just provide a foundation of understanding, which is one of our goals. So let me jump into it, get through that stuff. We do this to provide the education portion. So we want people to have an understanding so then they can go make an informed decision. IBC is for me, it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. Awesome. Let's roll. I know what you're talking about, and this is not where I want to take my family. This is not a direction I would head. Awesome. That's great. We just want you to have the understanding and the knowledge. The second reason we do this is we want to provide practical, implementable examples and scenarios and objects or whatever you want to say, however you want to say it. So we've done that in several past episodes with cars. Mike loves his trucks. So I don't know how many times we've talked about a truck on this thing. But that's the second reason we do this. And the third one is to try and get the word out as much as possible. So if you would share, subscribe, like, send it to whomever you can. We'd appreciate, because getting the word out is the goal. Having the education and the knowledge is why we're doing what we're doing. We have a phone number, 507-205-2284. So if you want to give us a text or give us a call, Mike and I will answer that. And then my email is dave@familybankingsolutions.com. Mike's is mike@familybankingsolutions.com. And then all of our social media stuff is in the footnote stuff down below. So all that out of the way, before we get to definitions, Mike, you're a grandpa. Kinda. Do you want to share that news?
Oh, jeez. No, don't say that.
I was just teasing his wife about being a grandma. So what's going on that would prompt me to even bring that up, Mike? What's happening?
Well, we have Bernese Mountain Dogs, and we have two females, and one of the females is up in northern Wisconsin at a breeder that has a male. She's been up there a week, and we just got confirmation today that it's been a successful breeding. So
puppies, here we come, right?
What's that?
Puppies, here we come.
Puppies should be coming in 9 weeks. So yeah.
So the plan is for my family to head out and to see the puppies. We're not getting the puppy. Mike begs to differ and has set things up to send us home with a puppy. But the plan right now is just to enjoy the puppies. There's nothing really much better than puppy breath. But to go out, hopefully burn some energy of my kids and the puppies at the same time and just enjoy them. So we're looking forward to that. But I'm excited for y'all. So anyway,
and if Dave is able to go back home to the state of Michigan, I'm in Minnesota. As you can see, I got snow here.
Yeah, it's sunny here. It's just not warm.
Yeah, if you're able to drive back home from my farm to the state of Michigan with 3 kids in the car after spending, a week with these little puppies and not bring one home with you, I mean, kudos to you, brother. That's amazing.
So time will tell. Time will tell. See. So yeah, we kind of have a little back and forth going on. So I can't say there's an over-under because we would certainly not take more than one puppy. But whether or not it's going to happen. So if you want to write in, that's a good excuse to write in and let us know. Is Dave going to go home with a puppy or is Dave not going to go home with a puppy? And then after that,
we talk to my do we get comments in like on YouTube? There's like below the show notes, people comment. I don't even know.
I wish I could say I looked more than I do. I have not looked in a while. We certainly have.
What if someone puts comments there and they're like, "Hey, please contact us"? We got.
I thought that was your job.
Well,
I don't know. It was no one's job. So
we should do that. Like if you listen to this podcast, you should go and make a comment That'll
There we
force
go.
us to look and figure out how
Yeah,
this
make
will.
a comment on this episode, either at Spotify, Apple, or YouTube, and let us know, is Dave going home with a puppy? So it's several weeks away. By the time you listen, hopefully you
And
listen to it.
Dave, go home with the puppy, or do you think are you going to take my side and and feel like no, there's no shot? His kids are spending time with him. It's going to be a long drive if you don't.
7 hours around the lake. So that's a great point. I'm genuinely curious what people would say. So if you would leave a comment
That would be
somehow,
awesome. A little survey.
yeah, we'll do a little quick survey, see what the data says. So I'm holding strong. All right, we're digressing though. Today we're going to talk about some definitions. So we have three key words that we want to talk about. I pulled up a couple of the definitions to read them verbatim from the company. So that's how I roll. But we're going to talk through the maybe call it not a dumbed down explanation, but maybe a normal, typical guy's understanding of what these things are, just to have people understand where we're coming from. So when you hear it next in your conversations about IBC, it'll make a little more sense if you don't already understand what they mean. So the first three, I got to jump back to where I wrote them down. Mike and I were talking about other stuff. Where'd it go? All right, first one, modified endowment contract. That's a fancy word or fancy few words that does not come up in conversation very often. That's the first one. The second one's a paid up additions rider. So what does that mean? And what's its implication in IBC? And if we have time, we'll see. We were talking, we may run out of time. But what does the base premium mean? You see the word premium, it's often synonymous with the term base that we use. But those three words we kind of want to talk through today. So I've been doing most of the yapping, Mike. So modified endowment contract. If you can give us some context and then maybe talk through what a modified endowment contract is. I think that's where we're going to start.
Great. So, what happens when we design these banking policies? And a banking policy is basically a specially designed whole life policy with a mutual participating company. And we add a paid up additions rider to that policy to kind of supercharge it and add more cash to accelerate the growth and make it a better banking policy. So what a modified, let's talk about the paid up additions rider first, and
Okay.
then go to because
Yeah, I think that's a good order.
So I look at it like if you're buying a car. See, I didn't say a truck. You're buying a vehicle.
Okay. You didn't stray very
And
far.
when you buy a vehicle, you can add on, they're going to obviously charge you more. I always look at like, here's what the vehicle costs, but then it's like $20,000 more because you got this trim package and you got heated seats and you got heated steering wheel and you got, all these other bells and whistles. It's just add-ons to the vehicle. Well, they have kind of add-ons to the whole life policy, and those are called riders. So you can attach different things and, add more benefits to your policy. And one of those is called a paid up additions rider. And that's, again, what we use to kind of supercharge the policy and add more cash. Back in, I believe, like in the late 80s, when kind of the real estate market crashed, there was a lot of people across the country, throughout the country, that were pulling all the money out of the real estate, and they wanted a good place to put it. And you could put it into one of these whole life policies and add, kind of like the heated seats, add a paid up additions rider. And that paid up additions rider allows you to store a ton of cash and works for you, all kinds of benefits with guaranteed internal rate of return, dividends, et cetera, et cetera. And you could add as much as you wanted, basically. So what people were doing is they would, and kind of what makes it tax-free is the fact that it's inside of this insurance policy. And again, we've talked before, the reason why it has these tax advantages is because the insurance business predates the tax code of 1913. Prior to 1913, there were no income taxes in the United States. Okay, and that's kind of big in the news right now with Trump's tariffs. But they established the IRS and federal income tax in 1913. So the insurance business predates, it's older than the United States is. So I kind of got grandfathered in as a tax-free vehicle. So what people were doing back in the 80s is they would take one of these life insurance policies, and let's say they were going to put, just using, let's say they were going to put $100,000 in. They would take and say, I want $1,000 into the policy to purchase a death benefit, a life insurance policy. And then I want to add a paid up additions rider onto that. And I want to put $99,000 of cash in there. Basically it's all tax-free cash account and just a little bit of insurance. So a huge advantage. You get the tax advantages. Well, around that time, then the IRS came out and said, okay, we're gonna change this, and we're gonna kind of draw a line. And that line kind of varies depending on, the person and their health rating and the size of the policy, et cetera, et cetera. But so the line is different for everyone, and it kind of moves and it gets very complex. But simplistically, it's basically a line in the sand that says, hey, we're going to allow you to add on this paid up additions rider and throw a bunch of money in there and have all the tax advantages, but you can only do a certain amount. You can't do 99%. Typically it's about, it's kind of in that, 60% is kind of a good rule of thumb. So, let's say you're doing $100,000, 40% of that has to go into an actual life insurance policy death benefit. And then you can add the other 60%, which is still a huge amount of money. And if you go over that line, and the line kind of moves depending on how the policy grows, and it's kind of a tricky calculation. And you get into a 7-pay test, and it's very complex how this is calculated. But if you go over that MEC line, it becomes and the MEC, it's MEC, and that MEC is an acronym that stands for a Modified Endowment Contract. And if it becomes a Modified Endowment Contract, the policy reverts to all the implications of a qualified plan. That's your punishment. If you MEC the policy, we're going to treat it like a qualified plan. So just think about that a minute. The government is basically saying that if you MEC your policy, we're going to penalize you and treat it just like a qualified plan. Most everyone has a qualified plan and they think it's awesome. Like, well, that's your punishment, because obviously in a qualified plan, you're going to have to pay taxes above. And again, it depends on whether it's, deferred or whatever, but you're going to have to pay. You can't touch it until you're 59 and a half. And, if it exceeds your cost base, et cetera, et cetera. There's lots and lots of rules and penalties within that qualified plan. And you don't want that to happen into your policy. So again, that's what we do, is we make sure that your policy doesn't MEC. There's certain things that we do in the way that we design them and build them. We ensure that it doesn't become a modified endowment contract. But that's what that means. Nothing happens to the policy. It just, you lose the tax advantages if the policy MECs.
So a couple thoughts, and that's a great explanation. But I'm thinking, I'm going back to my days when I knew nothing about this. For those that don't know, Mike, what is a qualified plan? You referred to that several times. What's a qualified plan?
Well, qualified plan is, most people associate that with a 401k, 403b. Qualified plan is where the government allows you, usually it's done through an employer. I mean, you can get, a SEP, different things like that. But there's more than just the 401k and 403bs, but it's a plan that the government has approved to allow people to kind of invest their money over time, pre-tax. So the qualified mean it qualifies that those monies that you put in there are before tax, and they'll grow over time. And that's a whole nother deal where there's advantages of
my goal was
investment, which
certainly
there's
not to get into that.
We can talk about that later, but But yeah, and then of course you put money into a qualified plan like your 401k or 403b, and you can't touch it until you're 59 and a half, or they're going to charge you a 50%, 50%, sorry, a 10%
10%. Yeah.
penalty. Yeah, and then it's just,
Well, my goal in asking the question, Mike, is just if you say qualified plan, someone may not know what that means. So really, going back to we started with paid up additions rider. So that's how we kind of build in the banking aspect. We add that addition on that may not be chosen every time the policy's done. But I want to say this too. You referred to the modified endowment contract as a MEC, an MEC. Paid up additions rider is often referred to as a PUA, which is just the acronym as well. So if someone were to hear PUA, it's a paid up additions, and then we just don't necessarily, you can hear the R sometimes, but if you hear PUA, they're talking about the paid up additions rider. But to your point, for a MEC, a modified endowment contract, it says if you put too much money into this thing, then your penalty is to revert to the plans that most people put their money in already. So I wanted that to sink in. That's a very, very good and interesting point. These things have so many benefits that if you do it, if you put too much money in incorrectly, your penalty is then it's reverted to how people invest most often anyway. Reverts to a qualified plan where the taxes are involved and things like that. I think that's a very telling point and one that maybe I don't often enough communicate. But with all the non-taxable events and things that go into these IBC policies, we build them so that none of those exist. Those qualified plan rules, for lack of a better term, don't apply to these IBC policies unless too much is put in, and we work really hard to not. The only way that would happen is if you go over our heads and say, as the owner of the policy, I'm going to do this anyway against my agent's advice or any agent's
well, and
advice.
then the insurance company as well is going to
Correct.
contact you.
They're going to
They
let you know,
don't
like,
want the
yeah,
policy to
hey,
match, but
yeah, if you put this in, this is going to mech. Do you still want to do that? So there are several safeguards in place. But if someone chooses to do that, then again, it reverts to the rules of a qualified plan. So recapping, paid up additions, PUAs, it's kind of how we build the banking side. A MEC is a modified endowment contract. So we stay below that MEC ceiling. Maybe if I were to give a visual, if you're watching on YouTube, I've got my hands up here. So there's a ceiling. We stay under that MEC limit. So there isn't a taxable event that is involved in IBC. So we build them specifically for that. So you don't have to worry about that. So that's the recap. Anything I'm missing in that? And you gave a much better, more eloquent explanation, Mike. But thoughts on those
yeah,
two?
and that's one of the reasons I want people to understand, and we've reiterated this multiple times. The life insurance policy that we're using, that we're designing, is just the vehicle that facilitates our cash flow system. IBC, or the infinite banking concept, we're you can do that through a checkbook that we've discussed. You can do it, stuffing money under your mattress, in a shoebox. You can do it in a number of different ways, in a CD at a commercial bank. But the things that we're talking about now, with the tax advantages and the growth and there's a laundry list of advantages. That's the reason why we use this specially designed life insurance policy as the vehicle to do our IBC. So we're what, the IBC guys, we're talking about IBC, or the infinite banking concept. Life insurance policy really has nothing to do with the infinite banking concept. It's just a vehicle that we use to implement the process. So, we're kind of talking about acronyms and questions kind of inside of the policy, which is great. I mean, people ask them all the time, but it really doesn't have anything to do with IBC.
Yeah. So the theory, the cash flow side, these don't have anything to do with it, but they're often like you said, they're often the questions that come up because they are involved in the mechanism that we utilize. And the mechanism, I guess I'm speaking just for myself, Mike. Many people much smarter than me have spent tens of thousands of hours thinking through this. And this is the best vehicle, to use your word, for any of this. So people have looked at it from tens of hundreds of angles. Can we use a CD to do it? Can we use is under the mattress just straight paying cash? And if you've read Nelson's book, he kind of goes through and talks a little bit about that. And there's other pieces of literature you can go and read more in depth. But all that to say, the goal is not to do a life insurance policy. There's so many benefits in doing it through that. The goal is to facilitate a cash flow system. It's just done through a whole life policy. So people often get hung up on that. Like they've heard this, they've heard that. We specially design these things. This is not going to somebody that is an insurance agent and saying, "Hey, I'd like a whole life policy." That is not this. Um, I don't. This maybe sounds pompous, Mike, but like if you go to a general physician to get a checkup, it's very different than going to someone who's going to do surgery on your brain. They're both doctors, but the skill set and their purpose is very, very different. And I would almost parallel that. What we do is more to the brain surgeon. We focus on one thing, we do it very well, and we do it with some preciseness. It's not a word, but we want to make sure it's done as accurately as we can, where a general physician is going to take an overall look. And I would equate that more to an insurance salesman. So I'm kind of deviating there a little bit, but the whole point is, yeah, these are specially designed whole life policies. All right. Dave's rambling aside. We had one last one that we wanted to talk about. Unless
Well,
you want to add to.
I want to speak just a little bit more on the paid up additions rider.
Okay.
That we're, you know, people call it, I call it, you know, kind of like this is your tax-free cash account. This is what supercharges your system to allow you to create more volume, create more velocity through your system. I apologize. I got a little cold or something here. So if I sound nasally, that's why. So what is this paid up additions rider? So first of all, let's go back and look at the specially designed whole life policy in and of itself. And we discussed this before on a previous podcast, where this really isn't insurance as I define insurance and as I know insurance. Meaning, for example, you have insurance on your car, you usually pay it every year or maybe every 6 months. And if you don't crash your car and file a claim, hit a deer in my case, you lose 100% of that premium. There's no cash value to it. It's just a 1 year thing. Homeowners insurance. I mean, every year I pay the insurance company, you know, X amount of money that protects me in case my home burns to the ground. And if it doesn't, they keep 100% of that premium, right? I mean, that's just insurance. Same thing with term insurance. That's life insurance. Its term is, and it's usually not a year. It's, you know, probably the most common one is 10 years, is you pay a premium and it protects you that if you die, there's going to be a death benefit paid to your beneficiary, but there's no cash value. And if you don't die in those 10 years of that term policy, just like if your house doesn't burn down and you don't crash your car, the insurance company keeps 100% of that money, no cash value whatsoever. That's how most people identify as insurance.
Well, let me interrupt you real quick. What percentage of term life insurance policies are paid out?
Less than 1%.
Correct. That's my favorite stat in that. So people pay this money in, 99% plus, all that money goes straight to the insurance company. Less than 1% are paid out. So I just wanted to
the reason why, yeah, that's a great point. And the reason why the less than 1% of term policies are paid out is because when you get insurance, let's say you get a 10-year term policy when you're 30, and let's say it's for $1 million, that may cost you $200 a year. If you get that a 10-year policy again when you're 40, it may cost you, you know, $400, $500, $600 a year. You renew it again and go from years, you know, year 50 to 60. In those 10 years, it may be $1,500, $2,000 or whatever. When you get to certainly 65 is a big jump, but it increases then. I mean, you're getting into the several thousands. When you hit 70, it's going to be 13,000. When you hit 75, it may be 25,000. So people aren't really excited about paying $25,000, $30,000, $40,000 a year. It just gets cost prohibitive at that point.
Yep.
So they drop it off. That's why they pay out less than 1%, is because people, as you get closer to death when you really need it,
Tough to
you
afford.
just can't afford to do it. So
Yep.
people drop it off, cancel it, don't renew it, and that's why they pay out less than 1%, because 99% of the people don't have it in force when they need it in force.
Yeah.
So this is a different beast. So just on the policy itself, if you were just to put in, so we talked about, putting in base and then adding this paid up additions rider, this tax-free cash account onto that to supercharge it. If you didn't do that, so if you just got the vehicle and didn't get the heated seats, okay, the vehicle being the whole life insurance policy, it still has cash value. It's totally different than insurance, totally different than term insurance. It will build cash value over time. By law, most policies now are written to be at age 121. It used to be at 100, but people are living longer than 100 now. So when you get a life insurance policy, a permanent whole life policy, it's going to be to year 121. And by law, that the cash value of that policy must equal the death benefit in year 121. So if you're just putting in an annual premium and you have $1 million death benefit, again, based on your age and your health rating and whether you're male or female, and actuarially they calculate all of this, that premium, that base premium that you put in every year over time, and it may be paid up to once a year 75, and still at 121, that cash value is going to be $1 million. By law, it has to equal that at $1 million. So my point being, through all of this, without the paid up additions rider, it still has cash value, and it's still going to grow every year. It has to grow every year, because again, you have to hit that $1 million at year 121. So what we're doing by adding this paid up additions rider is, again, we're just supercharging it. We're adding a ton of cash value in those early years, so it can kind of start working for you and growing much, much, much faster. So that's the reason for that. Now, as far as what is the paid up additions, what is that? What is paid up additions? Paid up additions, real quickly here, is additional insurance paid up in 1 year. So, for example, a whole life policy, I want $1 million death benefit, and they say, okay, you got to put in $1,000 a year every year up until age 75, and then actuarially they calculate that, blah blah blah, and it's going to have to equal $1 million at year 121. Well, when you put in paid up additions, you're buying additional death benefit, additional life insurance that's going to now be above $1 million, and it's all paid up in the first year. So you don't have to put it in year 2, year 3, year 4, all the way up to until age 75. It's like a single premium addition. You're paying for it all in the first year, hence the paid up additional insurance, where they call it a paid up additions rider. It allows you to add paid up additional death benefit basically every year. So that's what that means. And the fact that it's not just it is tax free. It doesn't have tax implications if you do it correctly. And again, we help you do that. But the reason why it's allowed to be tax free is because it actually is buying additional insurance. So again, the weeds there, I want people to understand, like, so what is that? You're adding additional coverage into your policy.
I'm gonna try and say this another way, Mike, and you can correct if I'm wrong. But the way my mind heard that is you made the statement where the paid up additions rider allows you to add a ton more cash value. I forget what word you used. But the reason I bring that up is that's all. A ton doesn't mean a whole lot of money. I mean, that could mean, several $100s, not a bunch. But compared to the base, it's significantly more, to use the word a ton again. But what it allows you to do is, instead of paying, to use your number, $1,000 the first year, you can put in several $1,000s that first year. So it's, to use your word again, supercharges. So you can get accomplished in 1 year what otherwise would take you 3 or 4 years. Is that an accurate way to say that?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, with the paid up additions rider. So when Mike says, let's use the example, if your policy is $100, so we're talking a small amount of money, but if it's $100, you can put in $150 additional money, so maybe even a second year's worth, and start working with $250 that first year rather than simply the $100. So you are supercharging that thing, and you're talking velocity of money. It also allows you the liquidity aspect. You can start moving that money in and out in terms of cash value with that paid up additions rider. So the reason we put it on there is because it allows to a greater capacity the banking aspect, the moving in and out of money. Your base is still going to garner dividends and internal rate of return. It's just not going to be as much because there's not as much in there. So you can accomplish what you would accomplish in 3 or 4 years, but you can accomplish that in the first year with a paid up additions rider. So does all that sound correct? Just stated a little differently, Mike?
Yeah, and you're buying again, since you're buying additional death benefit, I mean the death benefit, the amount of death benefit you have is really what's driving, your dividends. So you're doing several things by dumping that money into your paid up additions rider. You're buying additional death benefit, you're increasing your dividend, which is growing the policy faster. You're allowing yourself from a banking standpoint uh, way more cash than you would normally have that if you didn't add it on there. So again, lots of advantages of adding that paid up additions rider on there. We could do a whole podcast
Yeah.
on that. It's really not the point. We just wanted because when we kind of, and I'm terrible. Okay. We're gonna do IBC and we're gonna add a paid up additions rider on there as much as I can to make sure the policy doesn't mech and blah. And like you said, people are like, I have no idea what he's talking about. I don't know what IBC means. I don't know what mech means. I don't know what PUA means. So we wanted to explain a little bit on the definitions as to what it meant and not necessarily get into the weeds as to how it
How it all
benefits
works.
the policy. I probably went too deep down that rabbit hole for this.
I appreciate the context, and even listening to it again, Mike, to reframe it in different words always helps me understand it. So I think this was beneficial for me too, even though we talk this every day, all day. Just to hear it said a different way, to maybe resonate with a different set of people is great. The one last thing, we only got a couple minutes left, but we had mentioned it already, base. So real quickly, I'll throw my definition out and then you can add to it. But the base is the actual insurance premium that exists there. So we build these in two parts, the paid up additions, which we just spent an extensive amount of time talking through. And then there's the base, which is what really the insurance company is concerned about. And the base is if you were to go just ask for a whole life, you're just going to get a base policy. But that's the key word that we use to describe what the insurance company, the foundation of what your policy would be on. So, Mike, expand on that. I don't know if I did the greatest job, but what does base mean?
Well, yeah, the base is actually the dollars that are going into your base contract. So going back to the example, if you got a contract that had $1 million death benefit, and let's say your base for that was $1,000 a year, that's the base contract. And then again, you add paid up additions and increase that death benefit. That's on top of it. It's kind of going back to the vehicle and the trim package and the heated seats. It's kind of the base standard vehicle, and then it's without you adding on the other bells and whistles. So the base contract is the base truck or the base life insurance policy, and also the base premium, which is that $1,000 a year, let's say. I mean, it's going to be different for everyone. I'm just throwing that $1,000 out there as an example. But one thing I want to touch on that premium, and this happens with everyone, is when people start out with their banking system, they look at it as, what's my payment the first year? What's my premium? But it always comes to, I got to make that payment. I got to make that payment. 2 or 3 years in, people eventually get to the point of realizing that this is a cash flow system It's like let's just say it's a checking account at your bank. I've never heard anyone said, "Man, I have the money, but I'm not really excited about putting $20,000 in my checking account. Do I really have to put that in there?" It's your money that we're going to use for life, for expenses, for velocity, for cash flow. And you, like I said, over a couple of years, it gets to be where it allows you to dump in extra money, a deposit into your banking system, and you no longer view it as a payment or a premium. But the
Yeah.
life insurance company calls it a premium.
It's a great point. And if people can wrap their mind around this question, it's the way I like to phrase it, but you can phrase it a bunch of different ways. But what is your rate of return on groceries? So I'll leave it at that. But that is the crux of what IBC is. It's to monetize money you're already spending. So if you think that's an asinine question, I go to the grocery store and buy my broccoli and I eat it and it's done. That's what this is for. How to monetize money you're already spending. So we only got a couple minutes here left, Mike. So we can't dive too far into that. Maybe we talk a little bit more about that at some point too. But again, you said it very well. The goal was just to provide some definitions. So to wrap it up, I'm going to ask if you would. We talked about comments as Dave going home with a puppy. Leave those. But if there are other comments or ideas like, hey, I've listened to you chuckleheads talk about this thing. I have no idea what this means. Send us an email. Leave us a comment. I'll go through and check those over the next couple days, and let us know if there's something you want us to define. We'll talk about it. There's so much that goes into this. It's not kind of sometimes hard to pick out at what depth you do it and specifically what topic you're going to talk on. So help us make that decision in the coming days. Leave us a comment, send us an email, choose the text. Let us know what you want us to talk about. But to wrap it up, if you would share, like, subscribe, comment, we've talked about that several times a day. That would be very helpful. I don't have the phone number up. You think I'd have it memorized by now. 507-205-2284 is our phone number. Dave at familybankingsolutions.com and Mike at familybankingsolutions.com. All right, Mike, we got what, 2 minutes left? Minute 47. Anything famous last words for this episode?
I got nothing. Good seeing you again.
Yeah, I always enjoy the
Take
time.
off on a family trip, so be safe.
All right, we'll do. And enjoy the snow.
Yeah.
Heating your fence build, but pretty. So you got to take the good with the bad. So, all right, we'll talk to everybody later. We'll see you on the next episode.